but I just want to give you a brief glimpse of my work at Superflux that I co-founded with John Arden, my partner who's here with her son. At Superflux, we imagine futures through storytelling, strategic foresight, speculative design, and narrative experiences, spanning areas like climate, emerging technologies, AI, AGI, and infrastructure. For 15 years, we've been helping businesses, governments, cultural institutions, and the public think about the future from the future. This journey isn't straightforward. It requires wayfaring. It requires people to physically and emotionally step into different possible futures and engage with the complex ecosystems around us. And such an approach encourages people to allow themselves and emotionally engage with some of the challenges we face today. But more importantly, consider and imagine the vast potential of the future. Today, I'd like to dedicate this talk to my mother, who passed last summer. And in her memory, we visited Bhutan with my dad, a place both my parents wanted to go for a long time. It was a very special trip and a chance to say goodbye to her in one of the most beautiful places on our planet. In Bhutan, the poetic language of the world both brought me home and also completely disarmed me. Soundscapes rushed past forests, monasteries, streams, and my body, holding things, entities, ideas, language, and expressions together. A profound sense of oneness with our pasts, presents, and futures. And this takes me to the first of the 3 acts of this talk, titled Ecological Wisdom. In Bhutan, I saw how nature breathes with spirit and meaning. The Somems rule the world of water. The Dratsens own the rocky cliffs. The Jomo guards the fauna while the Mems tend to the flora. Gangtsengs whisper across the ridges. Lungsens dance on the winds while guardians like Gyalpos and Nelpos, along with spirits like Lu and Relpo, preside over the landscape. Such beliefs, inspired from ancient shamanic traditions and Buddhist practices, has really created this rich living mythology that shapes their relationship with the land. Stories need not be religious, but they must move the spirit and connect us with the sacred. And this has been beautifully put by Bhutanese author T. Sangye Wangchuk. A core belief here is that humans are mere visitors, while the true guardians are the spirits of the land. To live in harmony, we must honor these guardians. Arpita Chatterjee from the University of Bhutan in West Bengal, India, describes such a religious ecology as the belief that nature is inherently divine. The mysterious, unknown, and often unknowable phenomenal world held with awe, reverence, and gratitude led to the early deification of the natural elements. Growing up in India, this resonates deeply. We have a rich tradition of reverence, especially for our rivers. The Ganges, the Yamuna, these aren't just bodies of water. These are actually breathing life, spirit, and sacred into the entities. Yet, in Bhutan, it felt even more concentrated, beyond theology, into a profound spiritual ecology. Here, the sacred is lived and breathed. I mean, a prayer wheel that is powered by a water stream rushing past it. Absolutely ingenious. Whilst Bhutan is predominantly a Buddhist country today, such a deep relational understanding of the world where people see no separation between themselves and nature predates one specific religion and can be traced back to a long time ago. And it's this deep sense of care, both ecological and intergenerational, and how it shapes our futures is what I want to talk about today. A secular kind of spirituality, one that is not religious but ecological. Such relationality is the foundation of the emerging field of spiritual ecology, which suggests a spiritual dimension to conservation and earth stewardship, encouraging us to weave spiritual elements into ecological practices, transforming them into sacred rituals of care. This idea was brought home by none other than James Gustav Speth, the US advisor on climate change. He said, "I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy, and to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation." So how do we enact such a transformation? I'd like to try and get to the root of this in Act 2, titled Multipolar Traps. In London, where I live, my river, the Thames, tells a different story. It used to be a sacred river, and I'll come back to that, but right now it's mired in controversy. Polluted with chemicals and PFAS, nearly 50 times above safe levels. A recent BBC report called it toxic. Tests reveal high levels of harmful bacteria and raw sewage, creating a death potion that threatens this ecosystem. Across England, 81 of 105 rivers surveyed contain PFAS at levels that would fail new, tougher EU standards. Some sites exceed these levels by 5, 20, even 20 times. Not that you think that when you see this idyllic photograph. And this one, this is River Mersey in the northwest of England, ranks amongst the highest recorded PFAS levels in the world. And unsurprisingly, despite regulation, we are not acting at the scale and the urgency needed. So chemicals like PFAS cause serious health issues, including development problems in fetuses and children, hormone disruption, decreased fertility, increased cancer risks, weakened immunity systems, liver damage, obesity, early puberty, the list goes on. These chemicals permeate every raindrop, every river, even our very cells. Yet, the Swedish body called Chemsec, who did investigations, revealed that most of the 12 large PFAS producers rarely mention them. Only 3M and Chemours facing litigation over PFAS are forced to report it regularly. The societal costs of PFAS, conservatively estimated at $16 trillion per year. Profits don't even come close. But why isn't this talked about like CO2? Because we can't measure it. We can't quantify it. We can't put a price on it. We can't offset PFAS. Measurable targets like European Green Deal aim for a 55% CO2 reduction by 2030. Yes, absolutely. CO2 emissions are very important to tackle. They warm our planet, cause sea levels to rise, create extreme weather. But focusing solely on measurable metrics like carbon emissions is a one-dimensional view. It overlooks other critical factors, microplastics, endocrine disruptors that affect human and planetary health. It's like the drunk man searching for his car keys under a street lamp because that's where the light is. But what's the point if the keys aren't there? The problem is bigger, more complex. Johann Rockström says it well when he describes the planet as a complex, self-regulating system. In a recent study from the Earth Commission on the Safe and Just Earth Boundary Systems by Joyita Gupta, Rockström, and others, they warn, our results are concerning. Several planetary boundaries have globally and locally both been transgressed. Without timely transformation, irreversible tipping points and widespread impact on human well-being are unavoidable. Wendy Broadgate, who's the executive director at Earth Commission, goes further to say, if our future is to be livable, we need targets beyond climate. Safety and justice must be accounted for. Stewardships of the global commons has never been more urgent than before. It is clear that the complexity and the uncertainty of our perma-crisis is not an optimization problem. We can no longer look at the world as a closed system, examine every solution, and pick the most feasible or the most quantifiable one. If you look at the red dot on the graph, say 30 years from now, it does not tell us that when you walk through the forest into a quiet, still wooded landscape, all you may hear is electronic smog. No bird song, gone. We don't have any tangible tools to grasp the enormity of what we are facing and act on it. According to Rockstrom, the number one issue is not that we don't have the science or the money, it's to get the leaders to act. He says, it's the number one issue to get world leaders to immediately sit down together and recognize that we need to urgently get back into the safe space of planetary boundaries. So what's standing in the way? I want to propose that a big reason is a multipolar trap. A multipolar trap occurs when individuals or entities act in their self-interest, leading to a collective outcome where everyone is worse off. Think of the prisoner's dilemma or the tragedy of the commons. Each participant, fearing loss, chooses strategies that perpetuates the problem. The climate crisis presents several multipolar traps. I've listed just a few of them, but the list can go on. The question is, who will raise their hand for carbon tax? Who will really put regeneration before profit? Who will step forward to lead the change? Each choice seems rational, but together they bind us in a cycle of harm. How do we overcome these multipolar traps? What will move us from intention to action? Something feels amiss. I would like to explore how we can move from being trapped into a space of possibility, of hope, and what might help us get there. Act 3 is titled A Spiritual Infrastructure. For a moment, let's travel way back in time to around 800 BC or so, when the River Thames was a sacred pathway winding through ancient Britain. To the Celtic Britons, the Thames was more than water. It was a deity, a divine corridor between worlds. In its depths, spirits dwelled, and every ripple hummed with energy. The Celts offered treasures to the river, bronze axes, ornate jewelry, sacred bones, gifts to honor the spirit, securing the land's prosperity. The Thames was a boundary, its currents flowing with tales of gods and heroes. I mean, there were bloody wars there too, let's not get too romantic, but what's worth noting is how much the river was revered. It was seen as something with a spiritual presence. Centuries passed, the Romans renamed it Thamesis, and yet the river's spiritual heartbeat persisted, whispering through reeds and along its banks. But then came the Industrial Revolution. Arrived bridging, damming, and reshaping the river in a relentless pursuit of progress, transforming into a very picturesque, yet very confined waterway that we see today. A reflection of our modern world brimming with infrastructure. And let me be very clear, I love bridges, I love infrastructure. I have countless videos of the beautiful sunset over Big Ben as I take the train home from London Blackfriars. But infrastructure, both physical and digital, while essential, isn't enough on its own. We need more than just functional regulatory infrastructure. We need an infrastructure that acts as a sort of foundational catalyst that inspires us to act from a sense of shared responsibility and care. And I think then we might be in a very different place. The problem, though, is so long as we see ourselves as individual actors, isolated and in competition with the world, so long as we think of our ecology as a resource to use, then we are constantly in the let's fix it mode. We are addressing the symptoms and not the causes. But if we recognize that as humans, we are not separate from our world, then we realize that what we do to the world, we do to ourselves, both collectively and individually. Heidegger calls this being in the world, living with meaningful orientation as active participants in the world. What if we were guided by a new kind of infrastructure that took this into account, or rather, an age-old one? An infrastructure that deepens our spiritual connection with the world. Abhishek Thakur from the Blue Ribbon Movement says it really well. If you want aeroplanes to land, you have to build airports. But if you want complex solutions to land, you have to create the landing pads for that consciousness. I feel a relational field needs to be there for new solutions to land. And I don't think we are building that spiritual infrastructure for answers to emerge from the unknown. And so today I'm proposing that we need to build a spiritual infrastructure. An infrastructure that connects us to our deeper selves and the planetary, cosmic, and metaphysical ecologies around us. Aligning our purpose and intent for collective well-being with the decisions, actions, and the choices we make. Here, I'd like to define spiritual as relating or affecting the human spirit or soul, as opposed to material or physical things. And the definition of spirituality, therefore, as an individual search for ultimate or sacred meaning. And therefore, spiritual infrastructure is a foundational infrastructure that nourishes, nurtures, and stewards deeper connections with our planetary ecology. Such a spiritual infrastructure acts as a glue, a bridge, a catalyst between the real and the ecological infrastructure, so that whatever we build and however we act, we are always in sync with our planetary ecology. Just to be clear, such an infrastructure already exists. I'm just giving it a name, like many other people around the world. Because once it has a name, it's a legitimate thing, right? We can then just get on with the act of building it. I have started drafting a series of guiding intentions that might help cultivate a sense of shared spiritual infrastructure, whether that's expanding our responsibility, embracing pluralism, acknowledging that there are ecological limits, and so on. It's also important to say here what it's not. It's not religious, it's not ritualized, it's definitely not coded into rigid forms that are coercive or authoritarian, and it most certainly does not involve any sacrificial practices. We are all bound together. Our bodies are shaped by countless generations. We have evolved from cellular life to tiny shrews to what we are today, deeply connected to the world around us. Our health, our very existence is intertwined with the earth. We are part of a continuous flow across time and space, a living thread in the fabric of deep time and ecology. What we do to the environment, we do to ourselves. And what we do today shapes the world our children and their children will inherit. Seeing ourselves in this way could become an organizing principle that allows us to break free from multipolar traps. It could guide us to act for a collective good, and where those who are not part of the thing, those who are exploiting, are held accountable. Well, how? If you think of infrastructure, it is, after all, an embodiment of a set of ideas made experiential out in the world, serving a real purpose. I think there are two mutually dependent ideas that form the foundational framework for such an infrastructure. It is expanding the self and intergenerational ecological time. So if you imagine yourself expanding horizontally out into the world, you begin to recognize that every action touches something around you, physically and metaphysically. This expansion also extends across time when you recognize that your world today is shaped by the past and everything you do will be shaping the future. This expansive way of approaching life across space and time is at the heart of a spiritual infrastructure. It creates the conditions for us to start seeding a different way of imagining and doing things, essentially rewilding our imagination. Let's dig deeper into the first principle, expanding the self to realize and fully acknowledge our interconnectedness. I read a story recently in an essay by indigenous scholar Ailton Krenak. He wrote about an early 20th century European researcher who traveled to the homeland of the Hopi Nation in northeastern Arizona. When he went to interview one of the elders, she was standing in front of a rock. The researcher waited and waited and then finally said, "Isn't she going to talk to me?" His intimidator replied, "She's talking to her sister." "But it's a rock," said the researcher. "So?" said the intimidator. We know that indigenous communities protect 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, with their forests boasting higher preserved biodiversity than non-indigenous forests. A key reason is that their belief that all beings are extensions of the self, their intricate worldviews, deeply intertwined with ecosystems, are reflected in myths, legends, and rituals that embody a profound sense of respect for the natural world. In World as Lover, World as Self, Joanna Macy explores this idea further. She writes, "The way we define and delimit ourselves is arbitrary. We can place it between the ears and have it looking out from our eyes, or we can widen it to include the air we breathe, or at other moments, we can cast its boundaries further out to include oxygen-giving trees and plankton, our external lungs, and beyond them, the web of life in which they are sustained." This expansion of the self exists all around us in the quiet work of individuals and communities, so many of you sitting right here in front of me today. It's the infrastructure of mutual aid and care that pushes out into the world and brings it back in collective spirit. It's the reason the elderly woman at the top of my road makes a little community wildflower patch. It's the deep listening practice of sound championed by Pauline Oliveros, the practice of sitting with silence. It's the vast, diverse, and secular pilgrimages across the world of walking in groups or on your own. It's the work of gardeners, teachers, tree surgeons, qigong practitioners. It's the small gestures of care with the communities around you, of people who have devoted their lives to nurture something beyond themselves. Demonstrating an awareness that we are individually insufficient and collectively indispensable, beautifully put by Vanessa de Oliveira Andriotti, where she talks about an embodied and expanded sense of self, fostering a sense of responsibility and care. It brings a new way of seeing the world as our larger living body, provoking a collective desire to live in sync with our full sensory and cognitive capacities. Which is exactly what Denise Ferreira de Silva said, inspired by quantum entanglement. She asked, "What if, at the subatomic level, humans exist entangled with everything else in the universe? When you know you're so entangled, you will care more, because you can see the damage that PFAS in your body is going to cause not just to you, but to your pet, to your child, to your water, and so on." The second foundation of our spiritual infrastructure is intergenerational ecological time. Our actions, the terraforming of our planet, will ripple through, affecting future generations in the same way as the past has shaped our present. Essentially, there are no futures without histories. When I was growing up, there was this little copper pot in our family fridge holding water from the Ganges. It just sat there, always present as a sort of little reminder of the sacred river, passed down through generations from my great-grandmother to my grandmother to my mother and me. I only realized it very recently when we had to perform a ceremony for my mother. There was no water left in it, but that pot still holds something, in a sense, a connection to the river spirit, is the piece of the ineffable quietly coexisting with our everyday lives, reminding us that we are all bound in time, that we already touch deep time. This reminded me of the Haudenosaunee seventh generational principle that encourages people to live and work with 7 generations in mind, taking into consideration those who are not yet born but will inherit the world. Whilst Rahoi is an indigenous Maori principle that protects nature by putting temporary restrictions on certain environmental ecosystems, including oceans and rivers and food, but even walkways and pathways and rivers, making sure that they want to safeguard them so future generations can use them at the same or even better rate than is currently used. Other examples of such intergenerational thinking is already here to give us hope. In Wales, they've created the Future Generations Commissioner, ensuring every decision considers the long-term impact. In Germany, Hungary, Norway, and Brazil, they have started to recognize the right of future generations in their constitution. And Germany has even used climate litigation to force stronger action, recognizing the need to protect those who come after us. From policies rooted in intergenerational equity to climate justice movements, from composing music that echoes for 1,000 years to wisdom councils that weave the fabric of long-term thinking, and planting trees for future libraries. These practices span the globe, seeing their place and their community through generational and ecological lenses. They open up a different relationship to time, encouraging us to consider, or reconsider, in fact, our place in history. So how do we remind ourselves of these truths of expanding across space and time? It requires a shift in our current mythological lens that divides the world into sections, focuses on profit and progress, to a lens that connects us to each other and the world. This shift needs tools, practices, and ideas that rewild our imagination. And these tools, and I mean tools in the broadest sense of the word, are actually myths, stories, poems, fictions, age-old practices that actually move us, bind us, inspire us to act differently, things that cannot actually be measured. Today, I invite you, let's make these tools, stories, myths, poems, fictions, our guides. Guides that can help us to imagine how we might flourish by living in a different way than we do today. That other worlds are possible. If we can imagine otherwise, if we can explore possibilities, if we can write new stories, only then we can act on them. The seeding of such imagination is cultural action. And cultural action is climate action. Such work opens up the mind by asking, what if? It allows us to test and embody alternatives to the present. Because, as Lisa Stevenson said beautifully, sometimes it's the truth of the possible as opposed to the actual that needs to be conveyed. At Superflux, while envisioning possible futures, we often are led down unprecedented wayfaring paths. For instance, for an installation created for the Venice Biennale titled Refuge for Resurgence, we asked, how might new myths and poetry nurture a collective imagination? For this installation, people were invited to a mythic future where they found themselves in front of a multi-species banquet laid out not just for humans, but other species. 14 wooden stools and plate settings are carefully constructed, customized for the different species they were intended for. A raven, a fox, a wolf, a pigeon, a rat, a snake, a cow, a mushroom, and more, all invited for a seat at the table along with humans. As we pick up the handcrafted cutlery and the plates that adorn the table, we are reminded of a timeless world where we are not at the center of the universe, but one amongst many interconnected species who share our abundant planet. Our multi-species banquet did not focus on logistics, like how on earth would a child sit and dine with a wolf. No, we wanted to reignite imagination. We wanted people to wonder, what if we saw ourselves as a part of a wider ecological whole? We activated visitors' senses, surrounding them with sound, smell, and materiality. This experience defies the mind-body duality, catalyzing a shift to a felt sense of responsibility and care. Rewilding the imagination can take countless forms, whether by crafting speculative fictions, immersive experiences, and art installations to make sense of the future from the present, or by restoring and preserving cultural sites for future generations. This is Nagaur Fort in India that my mother spent her lifetime conserving. Or reincorporating age-old indigenous practices in modern agriculture. Such cultural action carries powerful weight. It thrives in a diversity of beliefs and urges us to expand our worldviews to become more inclusive and adaptive. Science helps us to know what we need to know about the challenges we are facing today. But it's art, poetry, stories, practices of craft and care that actually move us into doing something about it. It's their power that touches us, elicits feeling, and in doing so, causes something to shift. I love what Ailton Krenak said. My main reason for postponing the end of the world is so we've always got time for that one more story. If we make time for that, then we'll forever be putting off the world's demise. I, for one, want time to tell a story about what these ferrets were doing with our GoPro, so you can catch me afterwards. And with that, we return to the end of the journey. A journey which has just been really about exploring how secular, spiritual, and ecological practices can help us coexist in harmony with our pasts, presents, and futures. And how our actions can mirror a deep respect for the interconnected world we inhabit, allowing us to honor the natural balance and the stories that bind us to the land. Building, renewing, reimagining our spiritual infrastructure is the new frontier, where we have best of both worlds, where we'll take the learnings and knowledge from where we are today and the technology. But we also learn from the traditional wisdom and spiritual practices that can help us move forward in more considered ways. Circling back to Bhutan, the unexpected meal with the monks in the zong was quite an experience. And then in my run up to the monastery one early morning, I was invited to sit in the prayer hall with the fraternity. Somehow, it brought everything into focus. I came home not as a Buddhist, but with an even wider sense of self, of being, than before. I understood more deeply because I saw it and felt it, how integrating spiritual infrastructure into daily life means living with a deep sense of connection, care, and responsibility for our wider ecological world. Whilst many of us see this as a time of crisis, I want to suggest that this is also a time of unexpected possibility. Building a spiritual infrastructure is a call to rewild our spirit before rewilding the world. I'll let Ursula Le Guin have the final say. You cannot buy the revolution. You cannot make the revolution. You can only be the revolution. It's in your spirit or it's nowhere. Thank you.
Wonderful, Anab. Thank you. We won't have time for a Q&A, I don't think, but we do have a few moments for reflection, and we have been permitted a few minutes to move a few minutes into the break. I think what you're talking about is so beautiful and powerful because it addresses two things that I personally certainly struggle with, and I feel that I struggle also with telling stories about and thinking about. And one of them is the tension or the sort of time blindness that we live with. Because there's a tension. On one hand, we are unable to grasp the 7 generations. But on the other, I think most of us are also unable to grasp that quiet forest might be 30 years ahead. Most of us are hoping to be alive then. And to force yourself to confront what's global food production, for instance, going to be like in that world. And how do you think elder care will function in the country where you live? How is your community and your family structure? What is the society like? How do you think this is going to play out? And where that is not the hypothetical children. This is now. This is your life and my life. And at the same time, to work with that 7 generation perspective. That's one tension. And the other tension is between the individual and the collective, because we are constantly told individual action is a lie. But there is no collective, and it's this the capitalist system is telling us that you have to buy, change your consumption patterns and that will solve it. Obviously, that's not enough. But there is no collective without individual action. And I think this is incredibly powerful. And I guess, let's start there. Would you like to say something about time and engaging with time?
Yeah, I mean, in my work, we face this every day. There's a real, you decouple your personal future with a collective one. But I think that's where the stories and the power of imagination lies, that we don't need to sort of move physically or conceptually. You're just kind of, these boundaries start to blur because you're situating in your mind the capacity to hold stories of a different type. And there is a huge power in letting them percolate in your mind. And I think we are so seduced by current, very sort of, the current popular narratives that have colonized our imagination, especially a certain kind of science fiction, is perhaps there's a need for alternative stories. There's a need for thinking about things differently. So I think we don't need to be worrying so much about oh my God, 7 generations, but we just need to be able to allow the plurality of time to sit with us, and stories play a role there.
Because then there comes the individual correctly. I think a lot of us feel paralyzed. The reason most of us are not acting more than we should to address these things is that everybody says it's very urgent, but we see no way of connecting. We just have to struggle with our lives, and we're very atomized, and we're very distractive, and we're self-soothing with entertainment and consumption, all of these things. And of course, there are these phrases like touch grass, Yeah. If you're feeling alone and isolated and afraid, you go out and touch some grass or spend some quote unquote quality time. I mean, share something with another human, joy or play or care. And you will be immediately connected to everything. Yeah. And of course, that's what you're saying. You can join a hiking club or a choir or plant something in your balcony. And then you are already doing the work. You are already moving towards collective action.
Yeah.
And that's so great, but I still have to ask, does that translate into political action?
Yes, and I do want to make a point here that individuals should not carry the burden of change on themselves. I think it's not fair to say you change your ways. I think that's why I mentioned the point about leaders and leadership. People in power have the power and to influence change, but it's about thinking of how can we not get paralyzed by the overwhelm, how some young people I teach, and I know many of my students experience ecological grief. And so I think it is about acknowledging what we have and being a participant, an active participant in it. And I think spending time with nature, in walks, in hiking, plays a role. And I think over time, if you think about any revolution, like India's freedom movement, it took 90 years if you look at the abolition movement, if you look at any movement, these things don't happen overnight, I think, but changing mind, changing how we think, asking questions, over time can have a really incredibly powerful cascading effect.
And you are laying groundwork, because we also know of successful revolutions that have, and cultural changes that have happened very rapidly, even though in the end they happen very rapidly.
Yeah.
They're glacially slow until they are very, I mean, it feels stupid to use an American example, because the reason we even follow American politics, of course, is already like a, consequence of cultural imperialism. But I think few people will have missed that the US Democratic Party has gone through an astonishing, energizing process in the last 5 to 6 weeks. And they have gone from absolute paralysis to tens and tens of thousands of volunteers showing up to do the work. And I found that hopeful, not because the outcome of that election is certain or will save anything, but it might stop a worse thing from happening. But I thought, okay, like that was there. In that atomized, hopeless, alienated society, all that energy was there. All of those people were just waiting for, like they were already tapped into something that was ready to be activated. And I thought, we can do that. And we don't know what it's going to be, so we need to be ready.
Yeah, I would say just observing more, aligning with our questions, being open to imagining things and asking questions. They're all useful things over time, yeah.
And you said leaders. I wonder, maybe, I don't know, now I'm thinking aloud, but maybe finding ways of just putting our feet on the ground and connecting to human networks in a different way is one of the ways in which we become the leaders. Awesome. That it's not somebody else is going to solve this. It's going to be the people of us, those of us who are together in a room. Oh my God. I have no good way of ending this. Would you like to send us off with a piece of advice or a thought?
Just thank you so much for listening and being here.
You can grab Anab outside and ask her questions. Thank you so much, Anab Jain.